the late 70s, a group from Manchester called Joy Division began to construct a unique sound. A sound which was to have a profound influence on the shape of rock music for more than a decade. But the event which ultimately ensured that the name Joy Division would never be forgotten had little to do with the music. Janice Long presents Substance Part 1, I Remember When We Were Young.
June 20th, 1976. Just back from a holiday in fabulous Torquay, Peter Hook picks up the local paper.
I always read the evening news, right, from cover to cover. It's like a really old habit of mine, a really old Manchester habit. And I was reading the evening news one night, and there it was in the little column, concerts. It had Lesser Free Trade Hall, Sex Pistols, 50p. So I thought, that was on Melody Maker cover. Never heard him or anything like that. Just read it in Melody Maker about the riot, and I thought, this sounds like a laugh. So phoned Barney and down we went, and that was it.
Barney, Peter Hook's old schoolmate Bernard Sumner, remembers the impression that performance made.
We always liked groups and music, but we didn't particularly want to be in a group until we saw the Sex Pistols, and we thought, God, if they can do it, we can do it. So I had a guitar that my mother had bought me when I was 16. And he bought a bass, and we used to go in my grandmother's front parlour, and she had a 1940s gramophone. So I pulled the needle out, soldered a jack socket on the stylus arm, plugged my guitar into the needle of this gramophone. Then I put another socket on my Nucky Gotties, and we played through that.
It certainly wasn't a musical inspiration, which is a weird thing. I mean, like, you know, we never formed the group with the intention of making music, really. We just formed it with the intention of having a good time.
We both bought these books on how to play guitar called, I think it's Palmer Hughes Book of Bass and Palmer Hughes Book of the Guitar. And I think when we got to page 15, we decided to get a singer. So we advertised in Virgin Records in Manchester, and we got quite a few loonies answering, and eventually Ian answered, and we'd known him, we'd met him at concerts, and we said, oh yeah, you can do it without just over the phone, because we knew he was alright. We just wanted someone who could get on with rather than someone who was good. But it turned out that he was a legendary genius.
So Ian Curtis became the singer, and it was Ian who placed an ad in a Macclesfield music shop that caught the attention of drummer Steve Morris. After the holiday period, a meeting was arranged.
The first time I met him was outside Strangeways prison in the car park. I thought, hang on, well, have they been on holiday, or have they actually been inside and they're getting let out? Very strange. So that was when I first actually encountered Bernard and Peter in Strangeways car park. And, yeah, we just went on from there. I just had the ability to go boom bang at fairly regular intervals, which quite appealed to him, I think.
Well, it must have done, because Steve became the drummer and the lineup was complete. However, no one knew how to get things moving, so the members of Warsaw, as they were then called, sought advice from seasoned punk veterans like Pete Shelley of local heroes, the Buzzcocks.
There were some guys who came up to us at a gig once and asked if we could have a chat with them about how to start a band, because I think it was a bit of a mystery how bands actually started in those days. It was about 1976, about October time, October, November. And so we got in touch with them, and we met them in a pub in Salford. And we told them that all the things that we knew, which wasn't a lot, because like we were making it up as we went along anyway.
Me and Barney were always like outsiders. Like, it was very cliquish. The whole magazine, the whole Buzzcocks, Morley, the whole thing was very, very cliquish, and we didn't really fit in, because I think we are different to them in a way. We were very, very working class, and they always struck me as being a bit middle class, and in that way you just couldn't compete with them at all. And Ian was like that as well. Ian stuck out. He stuck out from them lot, just like me and Barney did, and that was the thing that sort of brought you together.
Changing the name to Joy Division, the band went into Pennine Studios in Oldham to make their first record, An Ideal for Living, an EP which would eventually be released mid-78.
We didn't know anything. This is what I was like. I mean, that's why a lot of the time you think that it was so exciting, because it was so new to you, and it was really interesting. Like now you're just bland to it all, you know, you've done it all, seen it all, been everywhere. And like then, everything, I mean like going in the studio, it was like really, Pennine then was a really bad 8-track studio. And yet it was like the bee's knees to us, you know, it was great, wonderful. And we thought it sounded great as well until we got the record. My God, that was the biggest disappointment of my life. That was.
Gillian Gilbert, practising with her band in the same rehearsal room as Joy Division, was similarly impressed.
I bought it off, well, it was my sister who bought it off Stephen while we were at the practice room. And because we'd sort of heard them sort of through the walls of the practice room, we used to think, oh, these are really good, you know. So they always want to buy the
Smash Hit record.
He paid him, he said, oh yeah. So we got it and we took it home, we played it on the record player, and we thought, oh my God, it's awful.
3501252.
In the late spring of 1978, the record label Stiff and Chiswick were organising regional band competitions with up to a dozen bands on the bill at any one venue. The Manchester Heat was held at Rafters on Friday the 14th of April. In the audience was a Granada TV presenter with plans to start an independent record label of his own. The label was to be called Factory, and the man behind it, Tony Wilson.
Early in the evening, I can remember sitting on a bench near the pool table, and a guy coming over in a grey gabardine raincoat. I remember the raincoat. In fact, there are photographs from that era of Ian in that. And Ian sat down next to me and said, you... I said, oh yeah. And he says, yeah, why aren't we on television? You put the rest of these crap things on television. So Ian sat down and began having a real go at me, and I vaguely knew he was Warsaw.
Tony Wilson, I don't know whether he actually thought any good or he felt guilty, because Ian was haranguing him all night at the Stiff Chiswick contest at Rafters. Hey, why don't you do anything for local groups? Why don't you do anything for us? You know, we're just going on and on at him all night.
Ian was he was one of the most polite people you could meet until he was on stage, or he'd had a few drinks maybe. And this Stiff Chiswick thing, everyone hated us in Manchester, and we got billed top of the bill, which we thought was great, until we realised it closed at 12. And you know, like only half the groups had been on it at 11 o'clock. So Ian just went berserk, absolutely berserk.
I mean, the Stiff Chiswick night, we were so angry, and that was when we'd not played for a long time, we'd written a lot of new songs, which was like Ideal for Living and the ones that were on Unknown Pleasures and stuff, and it was like we were bursting to play it.
Reviewing the gig for Sounds that night was John Savage.
I remember them as being not terribly good, but I remember them as being really impressed by the fact they obviously had something to communicate, and we're in that really interesting period, which you just don't see now, that you get groups that are starting and they're still trying to find ways of articulating what it is they want to say. And there was a real sense that they were hurling themselves into the void, that they were desperate. They were not only desperate, but they were terrified of stopping, of failing. And that was spurring them on. And I found that very touching and moving.
Now, the club DJ on that night was Rob Gretton, a man who was soon to play a major role in the group's development.
Warsaw, or Joy Division, whatever they were called in them days, didn't go on till about, I think it was gone 2 in the morning. It was around 2 anyway, when most people had left, and there was only like 20 or 30 people left. And I just thought they were the best band I'd ever seen.
The evening went on and all the groups played, and then at 2:10, the final group got on stage, played, I remember 2, some people say it was 3 numbers, I can't remember, and were then thrown off and the plugs pulled. And that was Joy Division. And I thought, well, that's it, very simple. I've watched 13 groups who were on stage because they want to be on stage and they would like to be pop stars and they like the idea of that. And I watched one group who had something to say.
And that night I couldn't sleep very well because I was thinking about it all the time. And I was going on to my girlfriend about it in the morning. And I went into town the next day to do some shopping or something. And in the next booth in the phone, I went to the phone boxes on, where is it, Spring Gardens. And Barney was in the next phone booth, and I tapped him on the shoulder and said, have you got a manager? And he said, no. And I said, do you fancy me being your manager? I think he knew I was a DJ at Rafters.
So I said yes. Come down to rehearsals next Monday. But unfortunately I forgot to tell the rest of the group. So Rob turned up, and everyone just turned around and said, who the hell's this? Grey-haired, beer-swilling polar bear. So I said, oh, forgot to tell you. He's our new manager. How about it? So we just gave him a try, and he was adequate.
With awful records available and an adequate manager at the helm, the band were anxious to play more gigs and were particularly keen to break onto the London circuit. But the quality of live work they were offered failed to live up to expectations, as Barney recalls.
Ian would ring up from his office where he worked in town during the day and try and get us concerts, right, because we couldn't get any concerts. We used to get these real dodgy agents saying, oh, I'll put you on in Blackburn for £5. And Ian had eventually squeezed £6 out of him, and we'd do it.
And we'd been trying to get gigs in London, by phoning up these venues, naive as, hello, we're a band, God, it must be so, it's just hopeless. And we remember the girl at the Elephant and Castle were putting gigs on. And she said to us, you'll never get a gig in London with a name like Joy Division. And it was hard work. It was hard work. I used to do most of it because I used to drive the bleeding van. To drop everybody off and pick everybody up. Oh, God, it was awful.
So with a hugely successful concert career under their belts, it was decided that Joy Division should go into Strawberry Studios in Stockport to record their debut album, Unknown Pleasures, for Factory Records. The deal was struck in a high-level executive meeting between Rob Gretton and Tony Wilson over half a mile at Manchester Jazz Club, the band on the wall.
We sat at the table, and I can remember we scribbled a deal on a napkin. And it was a very, very favourable deal for Joy Division, one has to say. A quite remarkable deal. Quite rightly so, because Factory was meant to favour the musicians, and the deal very much did. And Rob said, we could record the first album for about £3,000 or whatever. And can you find that? And since I'd actually used $3,000 that my mother had left me to get the first record off, and that had then returned itself, I thought I had that money available. In fact, the record, Unknown Pleasures, went on to cost about 10 grand. Went a bit over budget, but those are the days.
Well, the producer of Unknown Pleasures and all subsequent Joy Division recordings was Martin Hannett. What was it about the band that initially appealed to him?
It was the feel of the bass and drums. They were a dance band with kinetic appeal from Ian. But the rest, they were just one huge rhythm machine. Barney was playing bottom two strings on his guitar most of the time. Definitely only two strings at once anyway. And they just meshed into a big machine that made very danceable sounds.
One virtue of mine was that it didn't change our musical ideas. It didn't try and alter what we did. He enhanced them. Sometimes.
The equipment was becoming more and more available. So absolutely everything that was done was reinforced in some way, either by doubling it physically or machines were whizzing away in the background, so the whole thing just got louder than possible.
It was more of a catalyst, him just being there in the studio, encouraging you. And I don't know, some people I've found over the years that some people I work with, even with other groups and different producers, some people, just by being in the same room as you, are a catalyst for some strange reason, and Martin was.
It was very lucky for me to be given such a nice piece of raw material. It was exactly the right time for me to meet them. And possibly the right time for them to meet me.
The Joy Division that people hear on record is like nothing like the way that Joy Division were live, because live it was sort of very loud, intense, and all this lot.
Unknown Pleasures is a bit difficult because it was done so fast. It took 2.5 days to record and about a day and a half to mix, so there are things that I'd redo. There were constraints on the way that I recorded the drums. I had to use a small room, which I never did subsequently.
I think the original LP that we wrote was good, but I think the production was a bit timid.
I think it maybe brought together a handful of influences that hadn't been seen in that particular juxtaposition before. And there are eccentricities and things that might make it charming. And there are also, I find echoes of Unknown Pleasures, for instance, in the Joshua Tree.
Every year or 2 years has the producer who takes sound a stage forward. In 79-80 it was Rushent. After that it was Trevor Horn. Now it's Jam and Lewis. But there is no doubt that in 78, 79, 80 it was Martin Hannett who was the best producer in the world.
Wilson, Gretton, Hannett, a united Manchester team was taking shape. And that team was completed by the arrival of another local talent, Peter Saville. Then, in his final year of a graphics course, it was Saville who was to develop the distinctive look of Factory's artwork.
What I was aiming for was a style of modernist graphic design, the sort of design which had began to happen in graphics in the early 20th century. And I felt very much that there was going to be a resurgence of interest in that sort of look. I mean, the style of youth sort of cult packaging then had been punk, and punk was getting more disciplined into new wave. And I saw the sort of design that I thought would come after the sort of new wave look, and it was very disciplined and it was very strict. And working for Factory gave me the opportunity to do it in a very pure form. I mean, Tony and the groups were always, wonderful clients. They would let me do it the way I wanted to do it. They didn't interfere. And so that's how we evolved a very disciplined, hard look for Factory.
The disciplined look meant that pictures of the group and information about them had no place on the sleeves. Accordingly, a sense of mystique grew around the individuals involved, and the band's relationship with the music press did nothing to dilute the enigma. Rob Gretton.
We did our first interview for the music press after Unknown Pleasures came out, and that was a bit of a weird time, because it was with Dave McCulloch from Sound, and he they ended up nearly having a fight with him in the pub across the road from Strawberry. He wrote, that it was like a heavy, angst-filled album, and he insisted that we had to be heavy, depressive sort of characters. And I mean, that from that day onwards, it really stuck that we were depressives.
NME's Manchester correspondent at the time was Paul Morley. Why does he think the Miserablist label stuck?
Some people have perceived that critics like me kind of contributed to that, because you would see a band and you would tend to sort of review them at 4 a.m. at home when you were feeling pretty sick. Actually, your girlfriend didn't want to see you anymore. Your mum was shouting at you to stop the noise. So you tended to invest all your existential feelings into the joy, because obviously they're titles, and when they started to make their music, their artwork kind of lent itself away from anything else, whether it be the Jam or Bay City Rollers. It was obviously very specific for whatever reason. Again, this kind of look that they had, the team they organised. So when that started to happen, you tended to approach Joy Division in a very kind of intense way, So, and this contributed, I think, to the way this so-called gloom thing came about. The way that the kind of critics who liked them wrote about them, the way Peter Saville did the artwork, the way that, in the end, their indifference contributed to it. They were so indifferent they couldn't be bothered contradicting it.
You see, there's kind of wit in Manchester, which is very dry. And a lot of times it doesn't translate to Southerners. They think you're just being awful. But we do it to each other as well. I think people think you're just being nasty and being horrible when really you're just joking, and they don't get the fact that you're joking.
My favourite memory of Barney is simply when I asked him what he wanted to drink, and he would say a quadruple Pernod and blackcurrant. And at the time, you know, that really did pierce the myth. I mean, you know, because I mean, as one of those people that probably contributed unwittingly and to an extent on this intellectual tag, I mean, I know for one, whenever you met them, they were just, you know, they could have been in the Vibrators or something. They had similar kind of character, or Eater. They were that kind of, you know, a lot of those band members that you remember from back then. There was a strange kind of nonchalant vulgarity about them, and that was, you know, the same with the members of Joy Division and New Order, you know.
Artists always aggrandize unto themselves the qualities of their art. And one of the great social and human beauties of Joy Division and New Order is that they've never done that. They've always behaved like and been ordinary yobs.
One of the problems, like success, is you start believing what people say about you. I mean, I'm a Joy Division, I couldn't understand half of what people said about it, so I couldn't believe it anyway. And you know, take it with a pinch of salt, because if you believed half the stuff that you said about Joy Division and it had affected you, you would have started acting like that, you know, going about reading, you know, being really daft. But we survived that okay. Well, three of us did.
Whatever Joy Division's relationship with the press on a personal level, the album Unknown Pleasures received unanimous critical acclaim. And like all artists who create something new, the band soon found a generation of copyists floundering in their wake. Steve Morris.
It was really after Joy Division had ceased that it sort of became most apparent that there were all these Joy Division clones knocking about, really. There was sort of everywhere on the John Peel show. It's quite flattering, I suppose, but I would have thought that because we'd done that ourselves, other people would be capable of doing something better than that, you know. But it didn't seem to work out.
Joy Division are the most important group since the Sex Pistols. I mean, in terms of groups who shape popular music, the Sex Pistols shaped popular music for a few years, and Joy Division shaped it for a few years after. And since that period, I don't think anyone has shaped it in that way. I always think it's a question of the kind of cassettes John Peel gets through the post. And I think from maybe January 1977 to January 1979, 99 out of every 100 cassettes John Peel will have got will have had, you know, the thrash, the pure punk Pistols thrash. And from about, I imagine, January 79 through to 82, 83, 99 out of every 100 tapes sounded like Joy Division. I mean, what I'm saying is the actual influence on people.
There was a terrible sort of dead hand of the Beatles over Liverpool for a decade or more. Certainly for quite a long time afterwards. I mean, the number of demo tapes that I've received over the years, and still I get a few that do, that sound like Joy Division. And there are quite a few bands in America and in the greater Europe as well, and probably in Japan, I should think, almost certainly, that sound very like Joy Division. And I feel that the members of the band themselves would, I like to think anyway, would find this rather laughable.
Group's copying, yeah, I think that's a bit daft, really, but I sometimes wonder how much we influence mainstream music, even mainstream pop music. I don't really consider Joy Division as particularly a pop group. In our sounding, the sound was very stripped down to basics. I mean, in them days, there were groups like ELO, things like that, who had just like millions of overdubs, and all we were was bass drums and guitar, stripped down with a few effects. And I think it was maybe that aspect that sounded fresh to people.
The single Atmosphere marked a development in the music of Joy Division. The unmistakable rhythm section remained, but washes of keyboards gave the records a texture and grandeur only hinted at on Unknown Pleasures. And 1980's Closer demonstrated the group's ability to sustain this ambient sound over a complete LP. But it was the words and voice of Ian Curtis which drew most attention. Deciphering his inspirations seems like pointless guesswork, but Barney recalls one formative experience.
I think he worked in a mental hospital at one time, and he used to go on about all the mad people there and how he was very interested in the way they thought, and he always, if we were writing a song, he'd always wanted to go off in a weird sort of manic, mad world, and just mainstream pop music was really boring in them days. I mean, it was tacky 70s. It was either the Eagles or Mud. I think in a way, he was really clever. To be serious for a moment, he was pretty clever, but he didn't appear it. It only came out in his writing, you know, which I suppose is the deep side to him. When he was with us, he was just one of the lads, you know.
Just one of the lads most of the time. But problems were beginning to emerge. Rob Gretton.
He became ill, you know, after we'd, I think he had a epileptic fit, on the way home from our first gig in London at the Hope and Anchor. I was coming back in the car, he had a fit, and we took him to the hospital. So that came on it. I think that was the first fit that he ever had. And as time went on, he did start to get a bit depressed about being ill, because I think he was a bit embarrassed about it, really. But you know, I mean, it was still a good laugh. It was still a good laugh, even right to the end, really.
On Closer, or the year before Closer, was when Ian's trouble began. That's when he got ill. So that's how sort of put the mockers on it a bit. You know, because I mean, it's like we were getting to the point where we could work a lot, and everyone enjoyed working a lot then. We never bothered about it, but we couldn't because, you know, Ian's physical limitations. And there was nobody that was more upset about it than him, you see. That's what got him down a lot.
And Peter Saville remembers a meeting to approve the sleeve for the new LP.
Ian had come with Steve and Hooky and Barney, and they'd spent an afternoon in the studio, and I'd shown them photographs and things that I was interested in. And they'd agreed with things, and as I said earlier, that it went really well with the music. And then after a few minutes, I suddenly began to think, well, the context that this was happening and what I'd just done with the last time I'd seen Ian, he'd wanted to use this photograph for Closer. And I had this horrible sense that we were ending up with a sleeve that looked like a funeral.
By May of 1980, the LP Closer had been recorded, and Love Will Tear Us Apart was outselling all previous Joy Division releases. The band were also making final arrangements for their first dates in America. Rob Gretton.
Ian was probably at that time more boisterous than any of them. And we were going to America on the Monday. He'd been staying at his mother's and father's and went back to Macclesfield. And he seemed in good spirits. We'd all bought new clothes for going to America and all that. We'd seen him, I think the last time we saw him was on the Thursday, and he seemed in quite good spirits that day, and he seemed to be looking forward to going to America.
In the early hours of Sunday morning, the 18th of May 1980, Ian Curtis committed suicide at home in Macclesfield. Not surprisingly, the memories of that day remain indelibly stamped on the minds of Tony Wilson, Peter Hook, Steve Morris and Bernard Sumner.
I just had a really good day. I was been water skiing in friends in Portland File near Blackpool. It was a really nice sunny day, and I just got back to this house of this friend. And the phone rang, and it was Rob, and he just said, "Oh, Ian's committed suicide." And I said, "What, he's tried to commit suicide?" "No, he's done it, he's dead." And the room just spun round, you know.
I was in an editing suite at Granada on a Sunday afternoon editing a World in Action, because I was working for World in Action then, and the phone call I picked up, it was Rob, and Rob said, I said, "Listen, don't, Rob, I'm in the middle of editing a World in Action for tomorrow night, you know, don't disturb me." He said, "Oh, I just thought, you know, you should know that whatever." So I said, and I told the editor, just, I'll be back in 30 minutes. And I think it's one of those things where I remember I can hardly remember driving from central Manchester to Chorlton, where Rob lives. But I remember when I came out of Rob's house 20 minutes later that it was incredible the way my car was parked, like sideways in the middle of the road with the front on the pavement. I mean, the way you actually park a car when you're in a state of shock, I mean, it's so different from the way you park a car anyway, normally. It's just like nothing matters, does it? I'll leave my car in the middle of the road because nothing is relevant, really.
Shocked isn't quite the right word. Sort of, I don't know, I suppose disappointed in a way. Because, no matter how bad things get, I don't think they ever get that bad, but, obviously, it was thought they did. See, it's just a waste, really.
One of the interesting feelings that I could talk about is the feeling of kind of friendly annoyance. I mean, like, as in, you slob, but in a friendly sort of way. Like, getting out, leaving it all to us, right? But with a smile on your face. And that is the way, I think that's the way I felt around the time of by the time the end of the week came, that was probably the way I felt. It's the way I still feel. You swine. Getting out.
The fact that he couldn't he most wanted success. He really, really did want to be successful in the band so that he could prove to all the sort of people who thought you couldn't do it or, had scoffed at you or whatever. And he never got the chance, which is the saddest thing of all, really. That was what he most wanted. And we only got that freedom after Closer with Love Will Tear Us Apart. That was when we really got the freedom to be like, maybe, not a successful band, but like a serious band where you could actually do what you wanted to do actual full time and not really worry about where your next, £2 was coming from or whatever. And he never really got that. He just missed out on it by a week.
Substance Part 1, I Remember When We Were Young, was produced by Mark Radcliffe. You can hear Part 2, Now That We've Grown Up Together, on Saturday at 2 o'clock as part of the Stereo Sequence.